Oh man! Oh my God! I'm so sorry. I'm late. I overslept, and I had this weird dream about snakes flying around or something like that. In any case, hello and welcome to Hermetic Journeys. I'm your host TonyG. We're looking at the incredible Emblem book Atalanta Fugiens, written by Michael Meyer, illustrated by Matthias Marian, and with me, my special guests, the Angry Mummy Candle. Hello, that's by popular demand. Hey guys. And the Happy Mummy Candle. Hello, nice to see you again. All right, I'm sure while I was gone, you guys put in a good word for me, right? Oh boy. In any case, it's good to see you again. Thank you for tuning in. Hello, everybody, family, friends, and new subscribers. Nice to meet you. I hope you love the lunacy here. In any case, let's get started. Before we do start, though, I always do that. Let's get started, and then before we do start, what I want to say is that normally I have my friend Maddie Javen talking about the Celtic component to this work, and of course Steve Kalick, sharing his incredible alchemy videos with us. He's an alchemist, of course, as we all know. But this particular video, as I was putting it together, I realized there's so many things that I want to talk about. It's so big and it's so deeply personal for me, because the origin of this particular symbol in this emblem, all right, the origin of it stems back to a place that I've wanted to go since I was 10 years old, okay? And I am actually going to be going there soon. So I'm really excited about that, and I want to talk to you about this particular place and what it means to me and how important it is in the grand scheme of just about everything, okay? In any case, so sadly, you're stuck with me. Yeah, I knew you'd say that. Well, I'm stuck with you too, actually. But you're always a pleasure. In any case, so let's get started here. Let's take a look at this emblem. So, as I said earlier, this is an ancient symbol, right? It is the symbol of the Ouroboros. That's the name of it, okay? It is a serpent or a dragon biting its tail. In this case, of course, it's a dragon. The image, by the way, was incredibly colored by Adam McLean of Alchemy website fame. Thank you, Adam McLean. Such beautiful work. And interestingly, the dragon is in a place of antiquity, right? It looks like these are ancient ruins, which Michael Meyer may be giving us a clue as to the antiquity of this particular symbol. And it is an ancient symbol. And it means so many different things to so many different cultures. We're going to focus on the meaning of it within the context, of course, of Atalanta Fugiens and this particular emblem. But we are going to touch on a few other things, all right? So let's see what the motto says. The motto says, "This is the dragon which devours his tail." All right, well, that's pretty straightforward. It's so funny how sometimes Michael Meyer is so straightforward and sometimes he's so obtuse. As in the epigram, which we're going to talk about now, okay? Yeah, I know. So here's the epigram. Let's see what it says. "A ferocious hunger taught the polyps to gnaw at their own legs and taught men to feed on human flesh. Oof. Now the dragon, while it bites itself in its tail and devours it, for the most part itself becomes food for itself. This dragon will have to be conquered by the sword, hunger, and imprisonment, till it devours itself and spits itself out, kills itself and generates itself again." Wow, oh man. So there's a lot going on here, right? First off, let me say that it took me weeks to figure out what he meant by "a ferocious hunger taught the polyps to gnaw at their own legs." All right, so when you look up polyps, whether it's in a book or on the internet, okay, you know what you're going to get, right? You're going to get polyps, and I'm not going to show a picture of them because Lord knows I've seen enough of them for the past few weeks in trying to find out what he means by this. Well, actually, I found the answer in an ancient Greek text. The text was entitled "The Banquet of the Learned Athenaeus," okay? And the author was a man named Athenaeus. He's a Greek grammarian, I think they call him. Yeah, grammarian rhetorician from the 2nd or 3rd century. Actually, what it is, a polyp or a polypus, as I found out, right? Yeah, I know. A lot of work goes into this, and you just sit there and make fun of me. Yeah, anyway. Thank you. I'm glad you appreciate what I do, and I hope you guys do too. In any case, a polyp is a picture of one. A polyp or polypus is a creature, a sea creature that lives on the coral reefs. And when it gets hungry enough, it actually devours its own tentacles. Or Michael Meyer calls them legs, but they actually are tentacles. So there you have it. And of course, people being driven beyond hunger will sometimes turn to cannibalism, right? Because you're starving to death, right? That's understandable. Not pleasant, but certainly understandable. So let's continue to the next part of the epigram, where it says, "Now the dragon, while it bites itself in its tail and devours it, for the most part itself becomes food for itself." Well, what the heck does that mean? I know. Okay, well, I think at first what we need to do is take a look at the dragon's physicality, right? The dragon is a serpent with wings, all right? Now, this dragon also has 2 little legs, but for the most part, that to me reminds me of the fixed and the volatile, right? The dragon can fly, but he's also a serpent with wings, right? So he's a serpent, so he does crawl, or he only has 2 legs, and he's kind of, I would say awkward when he's walking on the earth. So I think he is earthbound and heavenly bound, okay? So I think it's the fixed and the volatile. So, and I think this also represents, in terms of the alchemical process, the Ouroboros represents the distillation process, or at least any process that requires repeated operations, okay? Remember emblem number 7 with the 2 eagles in the nest, and we talked about the distillation process where one had wings, one didn't have wings, okay? And each time the distillation process occurs, it's known as an eagle. Remember that? Yeah, I think it's kind of cool, don't you? Absolutely. But we can further break this down, get to the real minutia of this Ouroboros. Ooh, that's a good word. I'm proud of myself. Because of this book, all right, this is Michael Myers' Atalanta Fugiens, as interpreted by H.M.E. de Jong. She is just an amazing scholar. What I normally do is I go and I do all my research, I put everything together, I write everything up, and then I double check with this book. Okay, and of course Steve Kalick, my Obi-Wan Kenobi. Essentially, that's what happens here. And this book is just instrumental in trying to understand this. So, what de Jong uses as an excerpt from an older manuscript called Artis Auriferae, and we've looked at Artis Auriferae once before. She uses a quote from it, and it says, "And that which remains at the bottom of the curcubit, or the alembic or the flask, is our salt, it is our earth. And in the black color is the dragon which devours its tail." So, okay, so I think I'm kind of right in terms of the dragon itself, the physicality of it. Okay, so it is fixed. It's the earth, right? Black salt. Salt is the body, fixed, earth. Here we go. "For the dragon is the matter which, after the water has been distilled off," all right, so those are the vapors in the distillation process, have been distilled off, "remains at the bottom." All right, so he is the prima materia, the dragon, that part of him, okay, the dragon's body, okay? And that water is called dragon's tail. So the water that rises from the prima materia is known as the dragon's tail. So he's biting his tail, right? So we know that this has to do with a cyclical nature. So the Ouroboros, in this particular instance, in my opinion, right, based on what I've researched, represents the cyclical nature of the alchemical process. Bang! How about that? All right? Also, I think it may have to do with the cyclical nature of the process involving mercury and sulfur, because we know mercury and sulfur are the 2 primary ingredients that create the Philosopher's Stone. That's my opinion. So, let's look at the next line here. "This dragon will have to be conquered by the sword, hunger, and imprisonment." So what does that mean? Well, remember emblem number 8, when Michael Myers is standing above the philosophical egg holding the sword. Okay, the sword represents the separation process. Okay, remember we talked about ores, configurations of substances that were not pure. All right, so when you have mercury ore, you want to extract the mercury from it, or gold or silver or whatever, you want to extract those. The chocolate chip cookie we talk about, right? So that's what I think he's talking about here. Now, the hunger and imprisonment, in my opinion, that reminds me, and I hope you're with me on this, of the Splendor Solis book, the beautiful image of the hermetically sealed flask, right? So the substance, the matter, the prima materia, the dragon, okay, as you can see here, is sealed inside the flask. So it is imprisoned. Okay, then the final section here, which says, till it devours itself and spits itself out, kills itself and generates itself again. So typically, in alchemical manuscripts, when a creature is depicted or referenced as devouring itself and spitting itself out, that represents the separation process, okay, as the biting of the tail, and the purification process, okay? And then, of course, you know, the dragon dying and coming to life again, well, that's the death and resurrection. That would be the cyclical nature of the Ouroboros and the alchemical experiment. There is, of course, beyond the alchemical laboratory process, a spiritual component to this, right? What's happening in the lab is happening within the alchemist, right? This spiritual evolution, if you will, okay? And Michael Meyer really doesn't touch on that in this particular emblem. I haven't been able to garner that information from this emblem in the discourse. But there is another work that Michael Meyer definitely referenced, because Emblem 6 of this particular work and Emblem 14 of Atalanta Fugiens are dead ringers, if you will. Okay, they're like duplicates, and you'll see that. We're going to explore that. This particular work I'm talking about is called the Book of Lambspring. It's an unusual name for a book, but it's a very interesting book. And this book looks at the Ouroboros, or the symbol of the Ouroboros, or the process of cycles in the alchemical work, all right, in a philosophical manner, not necessarily in an alchemical manner. So we're going to take a look at that. So let's take a journey down the road less traveled to the Book of Lambspring. No, you can't come along. I'm sorry. I'd like to take you, but we're on a journey. It's a personal journey. Sorry, guys. So here we are in the land of the Book of Lambspring. So what's so special about this book? Okay, well, I would describe it as a self-help book towards attaining spirituality. So the structure of the Book of Lambspring is similar to Atalanta Fugiens. We have an emblem, a motto, and an epigram. There is no discourse, although the epigrams in the Book of Lambspring are typically longer. Now we're going to take a look at a few emblems from Lambspring so that we can better understand it, and better understand, of course, Emblem 14 of Atalanta Fugiens, because they are definitely linked, and you'll see why. So let's take a look at emblem number 1. Emblem number 1, the motto says, the sea is the body, the two fishes are soul and spirit. Well, we have this beautiful setting. The two fishes are soul and spirit, and they're swimming in the body. Okay, so what are we talking about here? We see body, soul, and spirit. Dad, body? What do you think body means?
Geez, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, Tony. But if I were to guess, I would say, I don't know, salt maybe?
Ah, very good. Salt. Excellent job, Dad. Okay. Soul, Mikey?
That would be sulfur, Tony. Sulfur.
Ah, yes, absolutely. Sulfur. And spirit, Vicky?
Oh, that would definitely be mercury. Yes, indeed. Mercury.
Ah, yes, very good. Mercury. So, salt, mercury, and sulfur, right? That's what we're talking about here. The tria prima. Remember that? Now, the fish are swimming in opposite directions, which is interesting. Could that mean they're polarities, right? Well, like mercury and sulfur. They are complementary in terms of the alchemical experiment, but they're also polarities. Or like masculine and feminine, right? They're certainly complementary, right? But they are polarities. And perhaps this is alluding to, resolving these polarities within us, right? So let's go to emblem number 2. Now this is really cool emblem. This is the quintessential knight fighting the dragon. The title of this emblem, the motto, is just as putrefaction. And putrefaction, remember, is part of the black phase of the alchemical process. Remember, we had calcination, fermentation, and putrefaction, right? Those are the 3 operations within the alchemical process, the black phase. I typically don't do this, but I'm going to invoke the analytical psychologist Carl Jung, right? Now, Carl Jung for the last 30 years of his life, studied alchemy, okay? He studied these images because he believed that these images come from something called the collective unconscious, all right? Or something like that. So in other words, a stream of consciousness throughout all of humanity for all time. And people pick up on these images. They dream about these things. So he used these emblems to interpret dreams, okay? It's really kind of cool. I mean, it's really fascinating stuff. But in this case, I think he typically referred to the dragon as the ego, all right? It's the big part of us, right? The ego. We certainly try to subdue our egos, don't we? So in terms of Jungian psychology, the idea is to subdue the dragon, to become more humble, right? And in terms of alchemy, the alchemist wants to become humble before the divine. Remember Heinrich Kunrad's oratory and laboratory, right? He would go into his oratory and pray before he would go into the laboratory. I think the knight fighting the dragon, the knight would represent your consciousness, okay, and the dragon, the ego, all right? That's kind of a Jungian thing. So I'll only use it in this instance here because I don't like to do that because Carl Jung's work, although brilliant, had nothing to do with these alchemical images, you know, when they were drawn, right? Or when this was written. Okay, so let's go to the next emblem. The motto says, "Here you behold a great marvel. 2 lions are joined into one. The spirit and soul must be united in their body." Okay. Now, what's interesting here is, you know, like we had 2 fish, right? Same species in opposite directions. Well, now we have 2 lions, but they're moving in the same direction. Really, really cool, right? So the epigram here reads, "The sages do faithfully teach us that 2 strong lions, to wit, male and female, lurk in the dark and rugged valley. These the master must catch. Though they are swift and fierce, and of terrible and savage aspect, he who, by wisdom and cunning, can snare and bind them and lead them into the same forest. Of him it may be said with justice and truth that he has merited the meed of praise before all others." If you're able to subdue those energies, all right, or unite them harmoniously, work with them, learn to work with those masculine and feminine polarities, everyone will, boy, this person's really got their act together, right? That makes sense to me. The last line here is interesting. It says, "And that his wisdom transcends that of the worldly wise." So the real point here is that the true battle is within, because you have to resolve these things within. There is no other place. You know, if people say terrible things to you, you can't control what people say to you, but you can control how you react to them, okay? Right? And so I'd like to recite something from this book, okay? It is the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. When I was a teenager, I somehow came across this book. I don't even know how it happened, but it has been with me since then, okay? And not this particular book. I've given away a lot of copies of the Tao to people who I thought could use it for help. But I think it's an incredible book. So I can recite it. "He who knows others is clever. He who knows himself has discernment. He who overcomes others has force. He who overcomes himself is strong." Got me? Okay. Well, you got Lao Tzu? Yeah, so what is it saying? The greater battle's within. If you can overcome yourself, you can overcome anything, right? This is starting to sound like a self-help video. Sorry about that. But I mean, that's what's really going on, okay? That's what's really going on here, I think. I believe. This is my interpretation of it. There are many, many interpretations of this book, and certainly of Atalanta Fugiens. So hopefully this makes sense to you, and it resonates with you as it does with me, okay? So now let's take a look at the final emblem that we're going to look at from the Book of Lambspring, which is Emblem 6, and wowie zowie. Look what we have here. Let's put them side by side, Emblem 14 and Emblem 6. Oh my goodness. So Emblem 14 from Atalanta Fugiens, we have the Ouroboros in a setting of antiquity, obviously. And Emblem 6 from the Book of Lambspring, we have the dragon biting his tail in a forest. Now, the motto for Emblem 6 in the Book of Lambspring says, "The mercury is precipitated or sublimated, dissolved in its proper water, and then once more coagulated." We're like, whoa, this suddenly became an alchemical experiment. All this philosophical stuff, and now we're talking about mercury. So the dragon obviously is mercury. And I would say that the dragon obviously could be mercury in Atalanta Fugiens as well. Michael Meyer doesn't say that directly, but I believe that's what he's talking about. Ultimately, what do we want to be, right? We want to have harmonious balance within ourselves. So I'm going to bring this image up. which is the rebus from Basil Valentine's Azoth. We've seen this image before when we were talking about the egg. We was Emblem 4 from Atalanta Fugiens. And we have the rebus here, which is the perfect, harmonious balance of masculine and feminine energies. He's standing, she is standing on a dragon. So, I'm going to tie this all up in a neat little bow. Thank you for staying with me on this, and I hope it all makes sense. I think the Book of Lambspring really helps us understand this particular emblem in Atalanta Fugiens, and I think Michael Meyer was definitely influenced by it, okay? So here we go. I'm going to read you what I've written to conclude this whole thing. And again, thanks for sticking with me here. Indeed, both emblems reference spiritual and alchemical works. The dragon must be conquered both in the alchemical experiment and within the alchemist, as the symbol of the dragon biting its tail represents the resolution of opposites in the form of polarities. We've discussed this previously in several emblems and witnessed these processes in Steve Kalich's videos demonstrating the spiritual nature of alchemy as symbolic of the alchemical laboratory work. Specifically, on the spiritual level, the Ouroboros represents the union of complementary polarities within us and brings harmony and humility to our soul. The dragon sometimes represents the parts of us, like our drives and hungers, and in a Jungian sense, our ego, that need to be subdued so that we may find harmony and peace within and connect with the divine on a higher spiritual level. And finally, on the alchemical level, uniting mercury and sulfur in the alchemical experiment is the most important aspect of the Ouroboros, as it ultimately represents the sequences that will create the Philosopher's Stone. This concept is further verified by the last statement of Emblem 6 of the Book of Lambspring. The dragon's venom becomes the great medicine. So there you have it. There we have these two beautiful emblems from two disparate works that so powerful, don't you think? The Ouroboros, the symbol, is so powerful. In any case, I hope that's made sense to you. So now, let's take a journey to the distant past, to a distant land, the origin of the Ouroboros. The church's reaction to the Book of Lambspring was pretty heavy-handed. They burnt every copy they could find. That's okay, because, any religious organization, I'm not just picking on the Catholic Church, I'm a Catholic after all, and really any religious organization promotes community and some sort of leadership, okay, someone to guide you spiritually. But that's not what Lambspring was about. And in fact, it's very interesting. When I was a kid, I read the New Testament, and there are two things that Jesus said that really stuck with me, okay? One of them is, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. And that was from Matthew chapter 17, verse 20. The second thing is, behold, the kingdom of God is within you. And that's from Luke 17, verses 20. Now here's the synchronicity. Take a look at the verse and chapters here. The chapter and verse here. Man, and I never realized that until I was putting this video together. Woo, what a cool synchronicity, right? So essentially, the Book of Lambspring and Jesus, okay, was telling us, you can follow my example because God is within you. I think that's what he's saying here. Hopefully I'm not upsetting anybody, it's just philosophical stuff, okay? As my brother would say, metaphysical fruit punch. He wrote a song, actually, metaphysical, right, Ken? Remember that? But it would appear that the very words that Jesus said, the organizations that followed him were not necessarily embracing that. So I'm calling this section of the video the Grand Misinterpretation, and this is part 1. This example can certainly be applied to the next section of this video. Now we know the Ouroboros is one of the most important symbols in alchemy, okay, because it represents the cyclical nature of the alchemical experiments and the constant flow of mercury and sulfur into one another, okay, and the polarities within the alchemist, okay, the battle with those polarities and the unification of those polarities. But where was its origin? Where did it come from? Egypt. To begin with, the very word alchemy is an Arabic word that is a description of ancient Egypt. Okay, al in Arabic is the definite article, the, and chem means black land. So alchemy means the black land. Well, what does black land have to do with Egypt? Well, once a year, the Nile River would overflow, okay, and it would deposit this rich black silt in which farmers could grow their crops. What was the name of Egypt? It was originally Kemet, or the Black Land, okay? And here's the hieroglyph for Kemet. So if Egypt was called Kemet, shouldn't the Egyptians really be called the Cometians? Well, where'd the name Egypt come from? Well, that was from the Greeks, okay? It was a Greek word that came out of an Egyptian word, an ancient Egyptian or Cometian word. So from now on, when I say Cometian, think Egyptian. Because the Cometians were really the people, that was their name. That was the name of their land, and that was the name that they called themselves, all right, the Cometians. So we're going to call them Cometians. So now that we got that out of the way, let's start the beginning, the very ancient beginning. How do we know this stuff? And how do we know the stuff I'm about to tell you about? Primarily through one man. His name is Abd'el Hakim Awiyan. And here's a nice picture of him. Hakim, as he was known to everyone, was an indigenous wisdom keeper of ancient Cometian culture. Wow, there's a tongue twister, sort of. Okay, and Hakim and the Cometians have a very, very different view of the past. The timeline extends way, way back, okay? And I'm inclined to believe this, and I'm going to show you why I'm inclined to believe it, and how our concept of Egypt, what we've been taught and what is accepted, is part of the grand misinterpretation, okay? So let's start with the timeline. If you look at this image, early dynastic Egypt started around 3000 BC, okay? That's a long time ago, 5,000 years ago, right? We are told that the pyramids and the Sphinx were built around 2500 BC by the Old Kingdom pharaohs. Well, Hakim's version of this story is very different, all right? Hakim says ancient Cometian culture goes back to 65,000 years ago. Wow, all right? According to Hakim, the Cometians were the builders of the Great Pyramid, or the pyramids, okay? The earlier pyramids, which are in better shape than the later pyramids, which is interesting. Don't you get better at building stuff as you do it? You don't get worse at it, right? But that's not the case here. Earlier structures were far better engineered and built than the later structures. So keep that in mind as we talk about this stuff. Hakim tells us that the Sphinx was carved 54,000 years ago. It is ancient. What we see today is not the original Sphinx. The body is the same, but the head has been recarved. So the Sphinx wasn't carved in 2500 BC. Hakim tells us the Sphinx was recarved in 2500 BC. Now, you have to understand that most of its existence has been spent being buried up to its neck in sand. And here's a photograph from 1852, which shows you, not too long ago, the Sphinx was buried up to its neck in sand. So if we look at the Sphinx today, and we look at the head and the body, well, two things bother me about the Sphinx. Number one, the head is disproportionate to the body, right? You look at the head. So if we look at this image of the Sphinx, and if we realize that it was buried up to its neck in sand for a long, long time, why is the head in better condition than the body? Hakim tells us that the Sphinx was originally carved in the form of a lioness. Right, because the Cometians were a matriarchy. The women were in charge, which probably is why they lasted for so long. Anyway, in this model, created by internationally renowned ice sculptor Robert Nayland, it's even more apparent that the current head of the Sphinx is too small for the body, and when remodeled with the head of a lioness, it regains its proper proportions. In fact, as we know, a few years ago, it was determined that the Sphinx is much older than it appears to be because the surrounding Sphinx enclosure and the body of the Sphinx was weathered by water. volumes and volumes of running water. Well, where did that come from? When did it rain like that in the Sahara? How long ago was that? Roughly around 10 to 20,000 years ago. So it's all starting to make sense, right? It makes sense to me, that is. Hey, if you don't buy this, it's okay. You know, it's just information. You know, take it in, see what you think. Think about it. It's interesting, isn't it? So what happened to the great Cometian culture of 65,000 years ago? Well, there's evidence to suggest that it was a global catastrophe. An asteroid, something hitting the Earth, causing tsunamis, wiping out most life back then, and most of the structures. So what we see are the remnants of the Cometian culture, the ancient Cometians, the Sphinx, the pyramids. You know, those are remnants of that culture. And there's evidence of other megalithic structures around the world. In certainly South America and Peru, there's some tremendous structures, same kind of thing. It's fascinating. You know, whether you believe it's Atlantis or Comitia, whatever you want to call it, or Kemet, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. But the way I see this is there was somebody was here before our culture, and what we see in the pyramids and the Sphinx are the remnants of that culture. And obviously people survived because otherwise Hakim wouldn't know this information, right? He wouldn't have ancestors to tell him about it. So obviously all life on Earth wasn't wiped out in this catastrophe. People survived, and they took that information with them, and they handed that down through oral tradition, through the history we know now, through Hakim. All right. So I do want to talk about, lay some additional groundwork in terms of the Cometians and how things were interpreted. And thank goodness for the Greeks, they wrote everything down, unlike the Cometians, right? The Cometians was an oral tradition. The Greeks wrote everything down. And you know, our culture is based on Greek philosophy and really Greek culture. It really is such a huge part of how we think, okay? However, the Greeks kind of put their own stamp on their interpretation of Egypt or Kemet, all right? And how did they do that? I mean, how did the Greeks know so much about Egypt or Kemet, right? Well, because some of the greatest philosophers spent a lot of time there. For instance, Plato spent 13 years there. Aristotle spent 20 years there. Pythagoras spent 23 years there studying in Egypt. Now, most people don't know that, but it is a fact. It's a historical fact. They spent a lot of time there, all right, because they probably found it as fascinating as I find it, okay? And they didn't come away with a complete picture of the Cometian culture, all right? And why do I say this? Because Greek culture and Cometian culture are radically different, okay? The Greek culture is about rational thought, right? It's more like the scientific method, right? Thank you, Francis Bacon. Cometian culture is all about spirituality and symbolism. To give you an example, when I say the word flag, it conjures up images of a variety of different flags to you, right? You may think of a variety of different things, I don't know. But when I show you this image, it conjures an entirely different feeling, doesn't it? It evokes something. It evokes an emotion. There's an emotional response to this flag, good or bad, whatever it is. So the Cometian culture was all about symbol, but not just symbol. What was evoked from the symbol, that emotion, that intellect that came from the symbol, that's what it's about. That's where they live. It's called intelligence of the heart. As an example, take a look at this incredible wall relief. Now, if you notice, this particular person has two left hands. Now, is that bad art? No, chances are it's not, because two left hands represented the act of receiving. The left side was associated with the feminine and the right side, the masculine. All right, so two left hands in an image, receiving. And in this particular image of my favorite pharaoh, Akhenaten, two right hands represented giving, all right, the masculine. So Akhenaten is offering whatever he's got in his hands to the god Aten. Now, speaking of gods, all right, the Greeks also put their stamp on how the Cometians represented their deities, all right? The term gods was a misnomer by the Greeks, okay? The Cometians called them netters, and our word nature comes from that word netter. What is a netter? A netter isn't a god in a conventional sense. It is the embodiment of a cosmic principle, like the act of giving and receiving, like birth, death, life, resurrection. all that stuff. These are cosmic principles, right? And the netter represents those principles. But most importantly, again, like I said, it's what is evoked from those symbols that is the key to understanding the Cometian culture. The Cometians chose the material embodiment of something, like whether it was an insect or a bird or an animal, all right, that best expressed the principle, all right? So as an example, here's an image of Horus, all right, the netter Horus. The hawk was chosen not because the Cometians believed there was an entity with a human body in the head of a hawk. I mean, obviously, it's ridiculous, right? But because the hawk has specific qualities that were associated with the principles of that netter, all right? I hope this makes sense. It's pretty abstract. So having this introduction as a background, perhaps you've gained a new perspective, right? Maybe you've been, in a sense, enlightened in terms of how the Cometians/Egyptians viewed the world, right? They don't sound so primitive anymore, do they? So where does the Ouroboros fit into all this? Let's take a look. All right, here we are, finally, the Ouroboros, okay? So the oldest known image of the Ouroboros comes from a tomb of a very famous Egyptian king, right? King Tut, or King Tutankhamun, right? And here's this beautiful golden image here. It's from something called the Golden Shrine in the tomb of Tutankhamun. And you can see there are two Ouroboros. Would that be Ouroboros? Well, there they are. One encircling the head, one encircling the feet, okay? So the serpent, or the cobra, right, was called the uraeus. Now, the uraeus typically was on the crown of an Egyptian pharaoh, all right? Now, they had different crowns for different things. In this particular image I'm showing you here, from the tomb of Ramses III, you can see he's got what is called the war crown on, right? It's this blue hat, all right? And at the front of it, we see the cobra, right? Well, the cobra, or the serpent, was known for protecting, as I said before. First, we're going to look at why the serpent was chosen for the Ouroboros, okay? And it was chosen in ancient Kemet, or Egypt, right? So why was it chosen? Well, the serpent, you may not know this, but snakes have two penises. Yeah, I can't even imagine that. It's trouble enough having one. They also had a forked tongue, and they shed their skin. So they represented duality. They were the very representation of duality. See, there's the symbol, the netter, right? Representing duality would be the serpent, because it has two penises, a forked tongue, and it sheds its skin, all right? So on a philosophical, remember, on the philosophical level, the Ouroboros represented cycles, and from the Book of Lambspring and from Atalanta Fugiens and all those other things. It also represented the union of polarities, okay? So it represented duality. So I believe, I'm going to take a left turn here, so be prepared, right? Don't get worried. I'm going to take a left turn here. I believe that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was the very representation of duality. It's sitting in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Maybe it wasn't so much good and evil as much as it was polarity, right? The knowledge that Adam and Eve didn't realize that they were naked. They recognized that they were different when she ate the fruit, right? It's all, of course, all metaphor. And of course, they had to be expelled from the Garden of Eden so that God could create the universe, because this universe is based on duality, polarities, right? This is what we've been talking about all this time, right? If you think about it. So I believe that's TonyG's interpretation of the Garden of Eden and the serpent in the Garden of Eden. I know, kind of like a left turn there, but the Garden of Eden represented the unity of God, right? We're all one soul. I believe this. I believe we're all one soul, and that duality can't exist in unity. It has to go outside of unity, and that's how the universe is created. And our goal, as through the soul's journey, is to return to the unity. We're all part of the same unity, all of us. People are so polarized today, and it's pointless because we're all part of the same thing. I know we all have different beliefs, and that's what makes the world interesting. I love the fact that people believe different things. It's so cool, right? But our goal is to return to the unity, right? That's what this is about. It's to understand that there are different polarities in this universe, and our job is to resolve them, or bring them to unity. Sorry, I'm getting philosophical here. But in any case, let's go back to the to the Ouroboros here. Okay, so the Ouroboros is about cycles, right? And the serpent is the name of the serpent. The netter is Mehen, all right? Mehen wraps himself around the solar bark of Ra, right? A bark is just another term for a boat, all right? And Ra represents the sun. So what is the journey of the sun? Well, the journey of the sun is the course it takes over the course of the day, right? And night. It traverses the sky during the day, okay? And at night, it drops below the horizon and goes into the underworld. So when the pharaoh died, actually it's kind of funny because the Cometians didn't have a word for death in their vocabulary. It was called westing. When you know, because the sun set in the west, right? Rises in the east, it's resurrected, sets in the west, it goes into the underworld, and it's reborn again. Every morning, it's reborn again. When the pharaoh transitioned, he would join Ra on this solar boat in his journey across the sky and into the underworld. Now, once they got into the underworld, they were threatened by the Netu, who represented chaos, all right? And that Netu was called Apep, and it was another serpent. So the function of Mehen was to protect Osiris and the pharaoh in the underworld from the machinations of Apep, chaos. Because if the sun doesn't rise in the morning, well, we're screwed, right? So the purpose of the Ouroboros in Egyptian culture, and specifically in this image, is protection. It provides protection for the deceased who joins Ra on the journey through the underworld. Okay? So that's what this means. At least that's what I think it means. So I hope this video has brought some new perspectives to you, not only concerning, you know, the Cometians and the Egyptians and the Greeks, but also in terms of the Ouroboros, this wonderful symbol. I think we've explored a lot of aspects of it, and there are so many more interpretations of the symbol. I want to personally thank you for joining me on this journey, okay, to all this stuff about Egypt. So I know it's not typically part of what we do here in Hermetic Journeys, but you know what? Hey, it's my video. I can do whatever I want. Right? So I hope you enjoyed this. And remember, the next video, the second half of it, will be part 2 of this. We're going to talk about the Temple of Luxor, and we're going to talk about the pyramids, which is going to blow your mind as well if you're not acquainted with that kind of thing. But in any case, have a wonderful, wonderful day. Have a great time or night, wherever you're watching this. Thank you to those who continue to watch. Thank you to new subscribers. I hope you're enjoying this, and I will see you soon.